Howdy Meeps, welcome to the Meeple Syrup Show. Hey everybody. This is the first time we've done this with music, so it's a little bit weird. But we're here with the Meeple Syrup Show. It is Wednesday night, so that means it is 100% Meeple Syrup time. And we're here with Jesse and Erica, and oh my gosh, there's also a Mr. Oh, there he is. Nolan Nasser is here with us today, everyone.
The one, the only, the
immortal.
Oh my God.
Nasser.
You asked.
You asked, right? So for those of you who don't know Nolan, Nolan is the CEO, co-founder, and captain of Deepwater Games, the ship. It's a ship.
It's just a ship.
It's just a ship. And it constantly goes from Great Lakes to Great Lake to Great Lake to Great Lake. And just makes games on it. That would actually be pretty awesome, Nolan.
Right. That would be really cool to just have a boat that is our office.
Yeah.
Which is a boat, and we just sail around the Great Lakes. I love it.
That'd be awesome. That would actually be kind of fun. Nolan is also an illustrator, and you might have seen his works in such games as Groves, New Bedford, Spirit Island, and as of recent was Fleet the Dice game. So lots of stuff. Nolan is heavily involved in the industry as a publisher, as a personality, and an illustrator. And he also is involved in the comic book industry because if you don't know, Deepwater Games is very closely associated with SourcePoint Games, which is an indie comic publisher. So lots of stuff.
Yeah.
SourcePoint Press. That's right. Mm-hmm. Thanks very much for Nolan for joining us. Yeah. Whatever. You know. Cool. And today's also a community episode. So Jesse, what are we going to talk about today?
Well, on the community side of things, we're going to talk a little bit about the new initiative, the boot camp, which is not even a week old yet, but it's already going really well. So for those of you that are participating in it, you already know what the boot camp is all about. It's about working together to take a game from idea to pitchable by April of next year. And so we started last Friday with our first milestones. So the way the boot camp is structured is that I'm going to be putting milestones up with a date, and then you just achieve that milestone by the date. And if we stick together and see it all through, you'll have a pitchable game by April, or at least something really close to.
And so if somebody misses a milestone, do they get kicked out or?
No, there's no kicking out and there's no signing up. There's just voluntarily participating and keeping up with it, right?
So it's nice and simple.
Yeah, it's nice and simple. I'm not chasing anyone down. I decided not to be a teacher anymore, and so I'm definitely not doing that. It's all up to you to sort of keep on and keep yourself on track. But we're providing a track for you to follow. And then it's also a little community. So we have check-ins every Monday. So a post will go up in Shop Talk on Monday with a question, and you answer that question and then post replies on other people's questions. And through that, participants in the boot camp will be able to provide each other with feedback and support and help each other get over roadblocks and maybe give each other new ideas and stuff. So it's both a structure to help you get a game project finished, but also its own little community that's working towards that. So yeah. So
don't forget, participating is a great way to keep yourself accountable too. So the more you comment, the more likely you are to keep going.
Yes, that's right. And that is exactly why there's a weekly thing on Monday that you can get in there, commit yourself to commenting to that, and then you'll find yourself easier to keep yourself on track.
Yeah.
So
accountability is a big part of it, right?
Yeah.
Just keeping on track. And once you let it out there, once you put your name out there and your ideas out there, and you'll see people are going to be interested in it. There's a bunch of people commenting on each other's little cross posts saying, "Oh, that sounds amazing. I want to see that be a real thing." And it's lovely to see that interaction on the community forum. And as a person who is involved with it, you might feel vested once somebody else is vested in you. And that's a really important thing. Yeah. We talk about this profession. I don't know if we can call it a profession yet.
One person on this panel.
Jesse's getting there. Calling it a profession or a vocation rather than a vocation. And we talk a lot about it as being a relationship-driven field, industry, whatever we want to call it. And it's true. This type of milestone stuff will help you generate relationships with other people, where you're going to get that guy, Zach Connolly. I'm not sure if he's listening, but that guy, Zach Connolly, was such a big cheerleader of my stuff. I really need to meet that guy. I really need to shake his hand and say thank you for, egging me on through that whole process, or whatever it is, right? It might not be Zach. It might be Eric. It might be Jesse. It might be Jamie Jones. It might be somebody else who's participating. And that's a wonderful way to really make yourself part of the community, just by cheering other people on. Be a positive force in the industry, like Mr. Nolan Nasser.
I was going to say, I feel like I remember probably like 90% of the people who even just like comment or share a thing or come say hi to us at a convention. It's like, it's such a huge thing. Like if you do that one thing and then like you do like later on down the road, I see you commenting or something like that. It's so much more likely that like we're going to have an even more positive interaction.
Yeah. Like you're actually going to develop a literal relationship, which is wonderful. Yeah. I'm just going to say hi to the people on the chat right now. Patrick Langley, very nice to see you. Patrick, by the way, is our latest patron on Patreon, www.patreon.com/meeplesyrup, and he is supporting us at a great level. So thank you so much. We really appreciate that. Bebo's on yelling, Nolan!
Bebo!
People are like, Stella!
Yeah. Ming is saying, where is that sexy man? And there he is, but Nolan popped up. There you go.
Jesse's right there.
Yeah, Jesse's right there. And Philip Villarreal is saying, it's a Nolan. Zach Connolly is here now. And there's Garrett Gunn. Nolan,
you talk about him and he appears.
You're Garrett's hero. There you go.
Garrett is my hero.
Yeah, Garrett should be everybody's hero,
right? Mutual heroes.
Yeah, mutual heroes. I think that's really what a lot of this is about. Like when I talk about building this relationship, it is we are each other's heroes. Oh yeah. Oh, Bebo says that Haley is yelling too, so that's good. Excellent. Zach wants me to tell you that he effing loves Realm of Sand.
That is awesome. I love hearing that, Zach.
Yeah. Ming says this. This is actually kind of true. He said the alternative to having others cheer you on is a crippling fear of failure and mediocrity. And so that I think he's just saying get in there into like
don't try the other things where like
if you don't become part of a community, you're gonna have this overwhelming existential dread of like, am I good enough?
Right.
Yeah.
And it was true. You've got to get over it, and you can't get over it until you've actually had those successes and failures. Like it's impossible to predict what's coming until you just have to go.
Yeah.
Have you gotten over it?
No. Are you kidding? I will say this. Most people know this if they listen to the show at all. Like advertising beat out of me. Like I will still be nervous as heck, but I can get up in front of almost anybody at this point because I'm just like, just go.
Yeah.
Just do it. Just do that thing.
So I mean, to further, advertise for the boot camp.
Of course.
One of the ways that I have over the last couple of years taken active steps to try and deal with the crippling fear of failure and uncertainty and all that kind of stuff has been to be really enthusiastic about my peer successes. Because then I notice when they're enthusiastic about mine, because we create this like nice little bubble of like genuine enthusiasm for all the awesome things each other is doing.
Yeah.
And so jumping in shop talk and being excited about other people's stuff and tell people about your stuff, it's a super positive space. And just putting yourself in a space like that can go a long way to providing some security against those feelings that creep in.
That's a great point, Jess. Yeah.
Great for feedback too. Like that's the thing is you need the criticism as much as you need the praise, but people will do it in the right way because they're coming from the same place. And so I think that makes it a really safe space compared to where it could be just plopped in front of strangers at a prototyping event. That
is super awesome, Erica, because once you build that community, you build that relationship and that trust through mutual admiration. And, Garrett said #mutual heroes. Once you have that, then you can be open and frank with your feedback when it doesn't hurt. It's like, I know that person is vested in my success. So this feedback is coming from a place of love and
it's genuine.
Yeah, it's genuine. I tell my students that all the time. Like in first year, they don't get it because they're first year students. But as soon as I start seeing them in clinical rotation and stuff like that, they understand that, oh, that Sen guy, he actually wants me to succeed. And now I take his criticism much differently because it's always constructive criticism. Never telling my students like, you are a dumbass or anything like that. Like that would be wrong, but also incorrect from a pedagogical standpoint. So I don't tell them that, but I might say, you know what, you can change this word here and this lettering might be wrong or whatever. Or when you are working with somebody, this is how you should probably do it. And in first year, they're all like, that Sen is telling me what to do, blah, blah, blah. But by second year, they're like, oh, that person is really vested in me being successful, wants to see me walk across the stage and get my diploma. I think they're coming from a place that is different than I used to think they were coming from, right? It's not us versus them anymore. It's us together, trying to be successful together.
Let's raise each other up instead of tear each other down. No. But yeah.
And that's what the Meeple Syrup Bootcamp is going to have a lasting effect past just the procedural, outcome-based measure of you got something done by April, right? And I think that's wonderful. Jesse, what are some of the milestones that you've put up already just to catch people up?
Yeah. So milestone 1 is to come up with 12 ideas. And then the Monday check-in this past Monday was to post your 3 favorites and then comment on other people's favorites. And then the next milestone, which we just posted, and we've got, I think, 7 or 8 days before that deadline comes up, is to take one of those ideas, and it doesn't even have to be the game that you aspire to finish by April. You can change your mind on that. Just take one of those ideas and make what we call a minimum viable prototype. And then try it, whether that's by yourself or with a friend or whatever, or both. Because the biggest trap game designers get themselves into is spending all of their design time up here and none of their time on the table. And no game survives contact with the table. So the sooner you get the pieces on the table, the sooner that you can start making progress and actually getting it from an interesting idea working towards being a great game.
Mm-hmm.
So
very true, very true, very true. Adam Young says, you mean there's an alternative to drinking imposter syndrome tea every time you sit down? I'm in. So he's in. That's good.
I would love to say there's a cure for imposter syndrome, but I have no idea what it is. Like when it hits, it's hard.
This is an alternative. Right?
Yeah.
Hopefully. Hilariously, Erica is saying that as somebody who's Kickstarter funded in 45 minutes today.
But even
did
still,
Scott Pilgrim go live today?
It went live yesterday.
Oh yeah, so 45 minutes yesterday. Sorry.
But even still, you had that feeling of like, you know what it is? This is what it feels like to me. And I don't know how to get rid of this feeling. It's like you snuck into a party and you're just hoping that nobody notices you're not supposed to be there. That's exactly what it feels like to me.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And Jesse and I often talk about this in terms of academia. And it's rife in academics. And you just don't feel like you belong.
Or you're not sure how to prove yourself. Or you feel like you have to prove. I'm not sure.
In academics, it's pretty easy. But you don't got it when you start, right? Like you don't have a CV that's full of like publication after publication after publication after publication. And it's really hard to bridge that gap. And because I'm not a researcher, I'm a clinical person. I don't have a CV that's long at all. So it's actually pretty funny. But I don't feel like an imposter. I've never ever felt like an imposter ever. So I don't know what that says about me. Maybe I've been faking it till I make
Sen's got a big ego. No,
that's possible. That's totally possible too. But and that's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just a thing. Right?
Hey, to be honest, maybe you're healthier than the rest of us.
Maybe I'm delusional.
That's
too.
Really interesting, Sen, because like I feel the same way about like all of the careers that I've gone through, like being an artist, also being a publisher and stuff like that. Like as an artist, my client list was not huge, and I never like landed any of the really big clients I wanted to, like Blizzard or Magic or anything like that. And so for a long time, like I felt like I was just a very mediocre artist, and I was never going to make it. And then like I started Deepwater, and I look back on it now, and I'm like, man, like all of everything I did in that, like for as a freelance illustrator, like was like what led to me doing this too. And so like all the things I learned along the way that you can't like necessarily put on a CV, like that's what led to me starting this. And now I feel like an imposter, and I'm sure like later on I'll look back on it the same way.
But learning is the really important part. It's like, to be honest, you can't feel secure in something honestly until you kind of failed at different parts of it, because then you're not afraid of that failure anymore.
Right. Yeah, don't be afraid of failure. Failure is your friend.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
A quick comment on MVP. So Zach Connolly is saying an MVP doesn't work so well unless you have a playtest group or willing players. Make sure you foster a game community too. And that's a good point.
It's good about fostering a game community. I disagree with the opening statement, though.
Yeah, me too.
Just make a game.
I solo test MVPs. I don't generally bring those out in front of other people unless it's another game designer who's doing the same.
Yeah. So I would say that, Zach, you are correct in terms of that you should do that. You should foster a game community. But I'm thinking that an MVP is still a legit way to start things, even because it just shows you as the solo designer that, oh, this isn't what I wanted, or this isn't what I thought it would come out like in my head. Or, hey, this is, and we should go on. We should keep on with this thing, right?
That's how you tell really quickly if it's going to work. And that in itself is also a skill that develops over time. So you really have to keep putting as many things to the table, even if it's like you throw them away, a second later, you have to be okay with that. So, yeah.
So Jesse, what was the other one that you had? It was ideas, right?
Yeah, the very first milestone was to come up with 12 ideas. Yeah, write down 12 ideas, 12 or more. Yeah.
12 or more. And did anything really interesting come out of that you can
share?
There
tons of interesting stuff came out of that. I can't even. So just jumping off the top of my head, Isaac Shalev had this cool simultaneous play variant on Can't Stop. That he outlined that sounded really cool. It was like one person's rolling the dice, but everybody else is also pegging at the same time using the dice, and you can pull out anytime you want. But if the bust happens, then you're going to be part of it.
Right,
that's so cool. And there was something about it, like a bonus die that was around. I don't know the details, but it sounded really cool. There was
ideas make more ideas, guys, and it really is good to read ideas.
There was a couple of really cool environmental angled ideas. So someone was talking about a game where players are working to strategically reclaim a city by nature. And then I started asking them about it, and it turned out the inspiration is that their local municipality is actually doing that. Is trying to really cool. Direct the growth of the city so that parts of the outskirts can actually be pushed back into being more natural spaces.
That sounds like Nasser in real life. That's awesome. I want part of that. That's cool.
Yeah. So there's tons of really cool stuff. Yeah.
Very neat.
Well, for the most part, Sen, we're pretty lucky. It's called Canada.
Yeah, right? Ming said something. He said, the desire to prove you belong is really toxic, but it's so hard to get out of mentally. There's a really good talk from Hank Green about healthy versus unhealthy fuels, and that a lot of people who are self-driven do so because they have this need to prove that they belong or are worth other people's attention. So yes, and if you don't have it, you're way better off.
You're the healthy one.
Yeah. I think it comes from this weird thing. So I've been on stage as a performer since I was 4, and I've never had stage fright except for my wedding, and I'll tell you guys about that in a second. I've never had stage fright, and I've never felt like I was always being adjudicated. It's just for adjudication of music, right? So I've always been adjudicated, always been on stage, always performing, always singing, always doing whatever. And I've never, ever felt like I didn't belong where I was. And that's, I think I'm the weird one. Because I don't think
that's
about
well adjusted.
I don't know. Because I hear from all my peers that, I don't feel that. And it's like, well, why do I feel that?
What do you think we're all trying to achieve, dude?
Was it getting forced into that early in life that I just? Well, because it's funny because I know a lot of my. Nolan, did you go to art college?
I did, yeah.
Yeah, and so art for a lot of the people who go to art college, the make or break is basically, can you deal with your professors ripping your work apart? And the people who can survive, and the people who can't don't finish art college. They're artists, they still do art, but they really that's the hard part for them. A lot of it is, right? So
I couldn't deal with it. I dropped out of illustration after 6 months of being in it.
Because
and then
harsh.
4 years later came back and taught myself everything.
Right, but it's super harsh, right?
Sometimes you have to be the right age for stuff. I'll fully say that. Having gone to school multiple times, there's very different mentality sets each time, especially when you're more consciously choosing what you're doing.
Right.
Yeah. And so Ming said, okay, so I need to put my kids in theater. This is a really good idea.
That is a good idea for a lot of people.
I think it is because, you know, I was constantly given feedback. I was constantly told not what was wrong, but how to do things better. Do you know what I mean? Like it wasn't like, you're wrong. It's like, hey, change this and it'll be better. It's like, okay, I'll change that. And you get the response, you get the feedback because, you know, your adjudicator likes it or the crowd responds better or whatever. So maybe it's just that I was put through a lot of like feedback.
I was gonna say it's a good immediate feedback on a ton of behavior very quickly.
And like measurable stuff. Like it's like pretty easy to see like, oh yeah, if you play this part of the song louder, it's gonna sound better. It's like, oh yeah, it does. I don't know.
No, yeah,
I'm just a wee little kid.
Just so people
wee little kid. Anyway, so less about me, more about boot camp. So what's next, Jess, for boot camp? What's the next milestone that you're projecting? Or is that a secret?
Oh, I don't know. So the way that I am running the boot camp is that I'm paying attention to what happens on the Monday check-ins. Oh. And I'm trying to gauge what the next milestone will be based on where most people seem to be and what looks like might be the next most important goalpost to get them
testing.
I was going to say, he's totally acting like a teacher.
You're totally being a teacher, Jesse.
Don't tell me that.
Don't tell any of that.
100%.
It's funny.
So,
but I think that's good. So we had talked, just to let Nolan in on this, Jesse and Eric and I have talked about how can we, maybe encapsulate what Jesse's doing in a format that people can, follow by themselves, like in a journal or something like that. Like Jay's Fail Faster journal is excellent for the playtesting part of it. And I think the boot camp type of thing might be a good workbook, journal, exercise companion to something like that to say, okay, get started is very different than playtest, right? So,
right.
Yeah. And then working through and then eventually bridging over to the Fail Faster playtest journal. And then what comes after that in terms of, getting your stuff ready to be pitched. So create a sell sheet, work on a elevator pitch, develop your portfolio, all that kind of stuff is really important. Cool. All right. So I think that's enough for boot camp because we've got somebody who is not involved in the boot camp as much, although maybe he wants to be.
I'm going to be now. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I'm really excited about this.
Yay. So Mr. Nolan Nasser from Deepwater Games, or so you say.
So I say.
So you say. Those of you who don't know, Nolan's originally from the Michigan area, which is actually further north than I am. He is literally like an hour further north than where London, Ontario is. So some parts of Canada are not America's hat. That's true. So he's actually
they did
probably,
dip to toe.
Yeah, it's like a mustache.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. It's like the hangy things that you tie your hat on your bonnet straps. So yeah, tell us about the move. What's happening and why?
Yeah, so I moved to Texas a couple years ago because I was just like in a very transitional part of my life. I had just started Deepwater Games. I was not expecting it to become what it is today when I first started it. And I had family in Texas, and I was like, I lived in Michigan for 20 years. I'm like, man, I just want to do something different. I want to live somewhere else. And so I moved to Austin. And it's been a phenomenal time, experience living in Austin. I will admit that I ended up getting so involved in Deepwater, I probably haven't had as much time to experience this city as I would have liked. But because of all that work in Deepwater, the team has grown, the company has grown to the point where we're now we have an office and we're moving everybody locally. We were running this whole company remotely, and that takes a massive amount of work. And we have screwed a lot of things up and we could have definitely done it better. But one of the steps we're taking is moving everyone together. And so everybody on the team is moving to Saginaw, Michigan.
Wow. Everybody
learning through hardship, people.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Interesting. So Jacob?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Wow.
That's awesome, though.
Yeah, we're all moving.
You'll be so much more productive when you're like in front of each other.
Yeah. I also may have just found apartments for all three of us right next door to each other, like in a really nice area too. So Jacob, Elle, and I are all going to be neighbors.
Oh, Jacob.
That's super funny. So it's really interesting because a lot of companies are like, oh, let's work remotely and let's do that. And I think it's great for the contractors.
Yeah, contractors, right? For sure.
Right, but and a lot of people say, because I work very, very intimately with Plan B, and they're like, well, why does Plan B want everybody to move to Quebec? It's like, well, there's a reason. And I think you found out what that reason is.
Right.
Like, it is, communication is a hard thing just by its own nature, especially with all the intricacies of a business. Yep. And then if you're going across time zones, if you're going across geography and distance, if people have their like face-to-face, like in front of them lives happening, that seems to be more important than what you're doing at work. And then finding that work-life balance, maybe for some, like the core group, having them together, that sounds like a smart idea. Thanks. As much as I think that, remote working is a luxury. Maybe it is, and maybe
you know what? Sometimes it's necessary because let's be honest, you can't all live in the same place. But if you can, then it's probably like think about all the things that are not translated through this medium, right? That are way different in person.
Right. So like and like especially in a creative industry like this one, being able to share space while you're working can be super valuable. One thing that doesn't happen when you're working online is you don't walk into the room while someone's working on some graphics, look over their shoulder and go, oh, have you thought about like doing this or that other thing? Right. Because now that I can see it from this angle, that's terrible.
Yeah, I thought you were gonna say you don't walk in and see them like naked on the. I don't know.
It's a very important part of the company culture.
I mean, like I'm not gonna speak to any company's particular culture, but yes, also that. Also
that, yeah, because I mean, Jesse and I have worked apart for 2 years.
Yeah,
and it's hard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, we got stuff done, but it was hard. And
it's just not the same, and it's so much slower than when you're in person.
Yeah, and Eric and I work together, but apart, and we really need to like actually physically get in the same space to not only because we're in the same headspace, but it doesn't because tabletop is such a weird thing.
You both have to be there for that minimum viable product.
Yeah, it doesn't translate exactly right until you're together, right? Yeah. So Jonathan Harb asked, well, he stated Saginaw is a random place to pick. So why Saginaw?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting question. A couple things. First off, so my business partner Travis, he lives in Midland, which is right next to Saginaw, and he's worked for Dow for like 10 years, and he's one of the founders of SourcePoint. And so he had been using Saginaw for like he had a warehouse in Saginaw for SourcePoint. Then when he and I and Jacob started Deepwater, we also used that warehouse for Deepwater as well. And it turns out like Saginaw is just like not an expensive place at all. We had the warehouse. There was already office space available for lease right next door to the warehouse. So we're like, this just honestly makes sense right now. Like our top priority is getting everybody together. Everything is already here. Like we're not interested in paying to move thousands and thousands of comics and games to a new warehouse in a new city.
A big deal.
Yeah. So we just want to get everybody in the office and like working together and everything like that.
Right.
But then there's also the added benefit that I actually grew up in Saginaw. So my whole family, like my whole mom's side of the family is from Saginaw. That apartment building I was telling you about that I found actually has our family name carved into the top of it, which is weird.
That is strange.
Yeah, it's going to be the Nasser Tower. Our family must have had something to do with the construction of it, or
definitely not the beginning of a horror movie.
Right. Yes. Perfect.
Don't look in the water tank.
It's a Hellgate. It's a Hellgate.
Yeah.
And Elle's from Michigan, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
What's Jacob's connection to Michigan, if any?
Nothing. Just us.
He's following.
He's just following. Yep. All right. Zach Connolly asks, what are some of the jobs that you're localizing to the Saginaw area?
That's a really good question, Zach. So this is something that we've been talking about a lot. And one of the things that we want to do, like eventually, like this is like a, more, 1 to 3 years out, but we want to obviously expand like our warehousing operations. So that would create jobs in Saginaw. And then we also want to run our own like print and workshop where we can, make our own game prototypes, print our own, variant cover comics and things like small run comics and that sort of stuff. Right. So we would have people like working in the workshop, and then it would also like create a space where we could host events and like teach people how to use machinery and like show people how to like give them a creative outlet for like learning.
So like a maker space.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Awesome.
That's great. And this guy here, he knows nothing about comics. He knows nothing about printing comics at all.
Nothing.
Nothing at all. Just so you know, that's an inside joke. Jacob used to own a comics short run press, right? Yeah. So that was just silly talk there. But yeah, so now you had mentioned when I approached you about being on the show that you are very interested in broadening the market for hobby games. What does that mean to you?
So this is a really good question because I was thinking about it when Ming brought up the idea of like always wanting to belong somewhere and how that can like become kind of toxic. And I feel like I've definitely suffered from that idea of wanting to belong somewhere in the past. And I think a lot of that has kind of translated into the vision for Deepwater Games and SourcePoint Press, where we're not trying to come in here and compete with like big game companies we're not trying to compete with Marvel for comics or anything like that. We want to just make our own audience. Like we have this really unique skill set to just like make cool stuff and make it well. And we want to like create that and create our own audience for it. And so part of what I meant by that was like getting developing games that specifically target like people who might not necessarily be gamers. We do a lot of comics at SourcePoint where it's just one shots. So it's like 4-issue miniseries. It all collects in one trade, and that's all you have to read because reading an ongoing comic series is really intimidating for people. So like a big part of what we focus on is how do we bring in more gamers, more readers, just more people who might be interested in this.
Neat.
Yeah,
and that's a really good mentality to have because I think you're right. Like, Stephanie Straw and Chris and everybody from Funko had this podcast a little while back about comic books. And one of the things that they really wanted to focus on, and they haven't had time to continue it, but what they did was they sort of said, and now's a good time to jump into this series at this point because you don't have to like know all the lore from the past 300 issues. Right. And so they were very good about that, but I can see it being intimidating walking into a comic book store and saying, okay, what do I get? Because there's it's just a wall of 4-colored covers.
It's a whole type of investment, right? Like it's different when you're picking up something that's contained, but yeah.
And then,
go.
No, keep going.
Even for me, like I've been reading and collecting comics for the last 5 to 10 years, and I just like a month ago bought my first DC comic ever.
Whoa, really?
Wow.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. That's actually
Which one was it?
Crazy.
So I bought I got the whole Identity Crisis run.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
It was something that like came highly recommended. And honestly, like some of it was like kind of just for research of like a project we have going on.
Sure. I get it.
Unless you can say thanks.
And so how do you figure that Deepwater is or can broaden the market for hobby games?
I don't know that we can. I feel like an imposter all the time. I don't know what we're doing. I don't know if what we're doing is working, but I think that like we have a really unique like perspective because one of the things that we do differently is like we go to 60 to 70 conventions every year. Like we hit every Comic-Con. We have weekends where we have 4 or 5 teams out at Comic-Cons and that's being run by like comic creators. We have our sales team and things like that are out there selling books and games and that sort of stuff. And that is really interesting because like obviously we all go to Gen Con and all of the big shows and stuff like that, and you see gamers like ravenously wanting to buy games, right? But it's really interesting to spend 30 weekends a year watching people who are not necessarily who wouldn't necessarily walk into a local game store come up to your booth and be like, oh, what is this?
Right.
Oh yeah, totally different audience.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important, is that hobby sells to hobby.
Exactly.
And that's why maybe all these gateways are getting so much attention right now too, is that we need that bridge more and more.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I told this story before on the show, but I'll tell it again just because it's very relevant. Is that when I was at Comic-Con this year at San Diego, James Hudson from Druid City Games, Skybound Games, he said on day 2 we took out all the demo tables and we pushed all the product to the front because people just wanted to grab stuff and go. Yeah. There's so much other stuff to do at comic conventions that
you don't have time to sit down and play.
Yeah, they want to go to those.
You got lineups to be in.
Right? You got somewhere to line up, buddy.
Right. That's really interesting. Yeah, that's something we've been doing for years. Especially at comic conventions, we don't do any demos. We do 30-second pitches. We read the customers and try and figure out what they might be interested in, try and get them a game that fits with them. That sort of thing.
Yeah, and and then I think a lot of comic conventions. I was just talking to one of the guys who runs the game section for Emerald City Comic Con. A lot of comic conventions are also having the side room that has games, and that's maybe where you can do demos, where it's a little quieter, where it's not the show floor. And so I think there's going to be this nice crossover there as well. I don't think it's going to be super lucrative at the start, but I think it's something that's almost necessary to do. And I often talk about this with people that, marketing isn't just shouting at the people who are already your customers. Right, Erica's nodding because she's been.
Well, guess what? You've already got them. They're wasting time. Yeah. You just wasted all your money.
Yeah, right. Those BGG ads to convert, you're gonna convert, but you probably would have got them anyway, right? And so you might be better off spending your marketing dollars on venturing out into a untapped area where you can bring in and be the first to bring in X fans, right? Because people are pretty brand loyal. The number of people in the world who are brand loyal is quite significant. And if you can hook them and say, now you know our brand as Deepwater Games, always look for the Deepwater logo, blah, 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 then they'll be picking up your stuff first and foremost, right?
I'll take that even one step further and disregard the brand. When we were in Toronto for Toronto Fan Expo, I had several people come up to my booth and pick up Deepwater Games and go, oh, I saw this at Snakes and Latte, or I saw this at my game store. Oh, this is really cool. I'm seeing this again. I'll buy this from you now.
Yeah.
And so it's even just that them seeing the products consistently.
Recognition is key. If there's a familiarity, makes a comfort is a thing. People are more likely to pick something up if it's familiar, even if they don't remember why it's familiar. And as you said, it could just be that they saw it one time before.
Yeah, and the fact that people like to support creators, people just in the hobby area, in comics, etc., really like to support the actual company as opposed to going through multiple distribution channels. Is a good thing for that. And then people always, I think, have this sense that, if I see it once, it may be a shot in the dark, but if I see it twice, 3 times, then it's consistent.
It's something.
That's something to, it's worthwhile, right? So there's that psychological, if you're there, you're creating a presence, and if you build it, they will come type of mentality there, right?
Yep.
Cool. And then you also mentioned a couple other things. Let's see, what else did you mention?
So while you're looking at the to-do list, then Zach was asking about Sovereign Skies. Said it's your first original title. What was the experience of finding and signing that game like?
The experience of finding and signing that game it's a saga. I'll try and keep this short. Basically, Aaron, I had been friends with Aaron Wilson, and we had been kind of in the same circles for about a year. And I knew he had this game, Sovereign Skies, and he kept trying to get me to play with him. And at the time, I'd be at conventions, and I was still freelance illustrating, so I'd be going off, showing my portfolio, trying to do other things. And in the background too, what nobody really knew at the time was that we were starting Deepwater Games. We had our first meeting for Deepwater Games at Gen Con 2017. I think it was 2017, might have been 2016. But yeah, and Aaron texted me and was like, hey, do you want to come play Sovereign Skies finally? And I was like, I can't, I'm going to a meeting. And that meeting was the first meeting of Deepwater Games. But then, so that that's just a funny quip. But we started Deepwater Games. We started like looking for original titles. We started off with localizations, but we wanted to start, getting some games into our catalog. And Sovereign Skies was just one that had been on my radar for a while, and then it was on Ian Zhang's radar too. And so Ian brought it to our like Deepwater holiday get together that year, and we played it with the whole team, and everybody really enjoyed it, including our lawyer. Our lawyer really liked it, which I think is what sold me on it. It was like, if our lawyer enjoys this game, like maybe that was a bad idea actually.
I don't know. Depends who your lawyer is.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Right. And so that was the experience of like finding it and signing it. But then it actually went through some really, really weird development cycles because Deepwater was like still trying to figure out what the heck it was doing. Like when we started, I wasn't like at the helm of it. It was all just like Jacob, Travis, and I were all like, splitting everything equally. And I was supposed to just be like the art director and the game developer. And then eventually like I kind of just took over as the CEO. And through all of that, we were trying to figure out.
Was it hostile? Was it a hostile takeover?
Oh yeah, it's always hostile here.
Did you punch
He's
Travis?
the captain.
I did not punch Travis.
He's the immortal.
He's the immortal.
Right.
There can only be one. You're like the Highlander.
Highlander, not captain.
No, like to speak to that for a second. I spent a lot of time like building my art business. And I spent years like working on that, and I saved up a lot of money that I had no idea what to do with. So I was like, I guess I'm just going to put this into this publishing company. And I funded like all of Deepwater's first print runs with like money I had saved and a little bit of like startup investment from my mom and dad. But it was not a lot of money. And so like we started Deepwater with like practically nothing, just what I had saved from like working at conventions and as a freelance artist, like literally money. I was just like, I'm just going to put this under my mattress because I don't know what else to do with it. And so, yeah, that was how I ended up taking over. At the time, I was like, I'm putting in all this money. I think I should be CEO. I don't know why, but I'm pretty sure that's what I'm supposed to do. And
You're at least to have larger share of,
if
you don't have necessarily the say, you should having the chunk of the money. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so, that's how that happened. And so, like through all of that, Sovereign Skies is just like at one point it's like an $80 game with miniatures, and then it turns into like a $30 game. We cut everything out, and it goes through this like roller coaster of like development. And we spent 2 years working on it because we were trying to figure out what the heck we were trying to do. And eventually it turned into like this sort of Gateway Plus game where it's like an introductory Euro. And like Aaron is amazing for sticking with us through this whole thing. Like we wanting to turn it into an $80 game at one point.
Hey man, it's just market fluctuation as well, right?
Positioning matters. Like what type of game it presents as is how it sells. So all of that is very important.
Right. It is. Let's ask this question. Mm-hmm. So you talked about designing for a wider audience with me yesterday. Mm-hmm. What do you think that entails? Like, how can we as designers design for a wider audience, and how does Deepwater play into that in terms of, this is not your regular hobby audience, they're hobby adjacent in comics or something?
Right.
So how do we tap into that?
I think a good example of this is something I've been thinking a lot about lately is that people don't care what game mechanics are, right? If you think about like all the most popular games, you go ask your mom, your friends, anybody, go ask them what the mechanics of Monopoly are. They're not going to tell. They don't know what the mechanics are. They're not going to be able to be like, oh, this mechanism is really cool, right? And so like a lot of what I do when I'm like thinking about games to sign or thinking about games to design, I'm not thinking about like what the mechanics are going to be. I'm not necessarily thinking about like what the theme's going to be, although the theme plays a role in this, but I'm really thinking about how I'm going to hook people, But not only that, I think a really big roadblock that everybody runs into with gaming is getting other people to play with you. And so a big thing that I focus on too is like, how do I create a hook that's going to make other people want to hook more people, right? I think a couple games that like one specifically for me that came out this year was Unmatched, is like a really great example of this. It's a game where I can go up to anybody and be like, hey, do you want to battle Bruce Lee versus Velociraptors? It's going to take 20 minutes and we'll have a lot of fun. And just that like alone is enough for people to be like, yeah, I'm in, let's play that game.
Let's do that thing.
Yeah. And so kind of figuring out how to like my first focus is figuring out how to hook players with a game.
Yeah.
The mechanics and stuff will come later. Somebody else will figure those out.
So smart people. Really smart.
The second order hooking is actually really good insight that we often don't talk about or don't think about. You're right, but it is true. Unless you're designing a solo game, and even if you're designing a solo game, you still should be thinking. It's still valuable to ask yourself, if someone picks this game up off the shelf, what about it is going to get them to get someone else to sit down at the table?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Word of mouth, honestly, is it's the best type of advertising. It is the cheapest, but is the hardest to get. But if you can, that is probably one of the best things, because there's nothing better than a personal endorsement, because it didn't come from the company. The minute that happens, people are almost much more immediately likely to say, "Oh, okay, me too."
Right.
Yeah. Right. Ming says here, player experience being sold on Immersion is king. And I think he's right that, and that's what we've been focusing on a lot over the last couple of years with our designs, Jesse, me, and Erica. We want people to experience stuff, and the immersion is key to that. And then people can say, based on their experience, they can talk about their experience, right? They can't talk about mechanics because they might not have the language to talk about the mechanics, but they can definitely talk about their experience because they lived it. And if we can harness thematic integration with mechanical integration and then create that experience, which is why I think experience is at the top of everything, and I do a top-down as opposed to bottom-up design process now, we can get them talking. And I think that's what's really important, which is why things like miniatures kind of sell, right? Because people can immediately see them and talk about them. And they can say, oh, this will be great to paint. They can see that there's something physical. Whereas just a board and cards on table, it's really hard to understand, which goes back to the Hasbro method of marketing, which is the literal question I get asked when I pitch to Hasbro is, okay, so San, what do you think this is going to look like if somebody takes a selfie or a viral video on TikTok? And are they going to take it? And what is it going to look like? And if it doesn't look like anything that somebody else can instantly say, I want to play that too, we don't want it. And that's kind of the very general base level of how they're thinking. Yeah. Because they want the player experience sold on Immersion, but then being able to be videoed and translated virally to mass audience. Because Hasbro's smart. They're like, yeah, like exactly like Erica said.
It should sell itself.
Exactly,
it's just,
right?
Like they want their friends to buy it for, like, that's the best part. Nobody, like Pieface is a great example of this. Nobody buys it for themselves.
No.
Like they all bought it for someone else. But think how many millions of that stupid game got bought.
Right? Right. And we call it a stupid game because we are gamers, but for the 5-10 times you play it and get laughs, I mean,
it was probably worth the $15 you spent. You know what I mean?
Right?
But
yeah, exactly.
The whipped cream.
And the whipped cream. All right. So
we have another audience question that slipped in while we were on that. Adam Young.
Good.
It's 4 back. So do you think it's easier to start a career in games with an art career already, or the other way around?
I think it's like they're both equal. I think they're probably two completely different things. Like me having a career in art, first off, like that is how I started the career in board games. I was doing art for board games, and so I made all the connections. And I like saw so much, I got so much like insight into how publishing works, like being on the other side of the table. I made really good friends, like Greater Than Games, the founders, like Christopher, Adam, Paul, and Jen. Like Jen was my art director. They were all amazing mentors to me, and like just gave me so much advice. And even when I told them I was going to stop doing art for them and start my own company, they're still just like so supportive, and they're so encouraging. And so like having those connections built already helped a ton. But I think I could have just done it the other way around too. It would have been like the same. It's a different skill set, I guess, is what it comes down to. Is like figure out what
you would have had to learn the other one anyway, no matter which way you go.
Right. I will say this though, Adam. Artists get paid. Right. Artists get paid up front.
We get paid if things do well.
Right. Whereas designers get paid if things do well, and it's a someday thing. Yeah. So I mean. Just for a point of reference, and this is not anything against our publishers. It's actually our fault, Jesse and I. But we have like, $1 million Kickstarters that we haven't got paid on because that's not how it works. Like you don't get paid instantly Whereas the artists for those things will get paid half up front, half when they deliver. And so it's just different.
The dynamics of the career are different.
Yeah.
Just partly because of the way the financial structures work.
Yeah. And what's more important, right? So like we can't put the game together without the design, but we also really, really need the graphic design and the art and all that kind of stuff. And those professions like artists and graphic designers and layout artists and whatnot are much more established as a half upfront type business, right, Nolan?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So, it's actually really interesting because we've been working with a lot because we have a lot of original games coming up, and like we've been working with a few different contractors, and it's so interesting how just like diligent they are about like, I will start doing your print files when you pay me half, and it's like, okay, yeah. No, I mean, I get that. But then like we work with so many artists who are just like, here's a contract, here's what we need, and they're like, cool, I'll do it. And then I'm like, do you want like half up front, like it says in the contract? They're like, yeah, sure, pay me whenever.
Yeah. It's interesting, and
some people are just like, they work.
Right. Artists get paid, but very, very rarely well. And I would actually kind of say that's not necessarily true. So let's just say on a game that I've made a couple $1,000s on, it's taken me 3 or 4 years to make that couple $1,000s off residuals. The artist for the game has probably already made that much money right off the top before the game ever got printed.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely a community of artists who are exploited and who don't charge what they should be charging for what they're doing.
Yep.
And, part of that's been driven a lot by the sites like Fiverr and so on and so forth that
competitions, right? When there's a lot of people who do what you do, that's a problem.
But it's possible as an artist to get paid well.
Yeah.
But you have to know what you can ask and how to ask it.
Yeah. It's do you have a name value? Do you stick to your timelines? All sorts of stuff. Let's move on because you had a lot to talk about. You said co-publishing is something. So this is the first time, or not the first time, but you guys are co-publishing, I know, Joseph's game, right?
Fantastic Factories. Yep.
Yeah. And the stuff that you did with Welcome To isn't really a co-publishing. That's co-publishing. That's localization, right?
That's localization. Yeah.
So what's the difference between the two, first of all, for the people out there?
So localization is this very like sort of somewhat unglamorous thing. Actually, now that I've like spent years doing it, I thought it was extremely cool at first. Now, like seeing the inner workings of it, it's a little less glamorous. But it's so like we'll find a game that foreign publishers made, and a lot of times their markets, like for example, like France or Taiwan or Poland. Poland's actually getting pretty big, but like those markets are a lot smaller than the U.S. And so they also might not be like English speakers, or like English definitely wouldn't be their first language. So like they want to find an English publisher who's willing to sign on to their game and just buy, X amount of units from them. So they want to like almost, it's almost like a lot of what we do is we're just like buying the game from a foreign publisher. And what we'll do is they'll send us like files. We have to usually they'll be translated to English kind of pretty roughly, and we'll have to go through and edit everything and like make some changes and whatnot, and then like add our logos and add our own edits and everything too. But that's what localization is. It's just like they send us files, we fix them, send them back, and then they send us games. That's the majority of it. We do have we have a really awesome relationship with White Goblin, where White Goblin does everything on royalty with us, and they just let us because like a lot of other localization is like we just pay them a lump sum and they send us games. It's literally like purchasing goods. But with like White Goblin, they do a royalty. They just let us like take Claim, because we published their card game Claim by Scott Alms, and they just let us do what we want with it for the most part. Like they have some stipulations, but it's been so easy to work with them, and like they don't mind us handling the manufacturing, and that is what we love doing because we're really good at making stuff.
Cool, very cool.
Yeah,
and then co-publishing then.
So co-publishing is I'm sure there's like a lot of different like definitions you could ascribe to it, but the way we do it is we find other publishers who have designed a game. Like let's take Fantastic Factories for example. So like Joseph and Justin designed this game. It's beautiful, it's brilliant, but it's their only game they have. And they want to give it like a really wide release, but a lot of times distribution won't touch that game because it's their only SKU. And it's just not worth their effort to like put that SKU into the system. So what we'll do is we'll partner with them on that game. And we will we'll handle all the sales, we'll handle all the distribution, a lot of the marketing. You know, we make sure that game is at every convention or as many conventions as possible. We handle all of the online stuff for it and everything like that. And then we also take over manufacturing of it so that they don't have to do that anymore. We take over the logistics of shipping. Like it's all in our warehouse or a distributor's warehouse now, and they're gonna get to like wash their hands of that. And that's great for like small design teams, because a lot of times what they want to do is they just want to design games. Like Joseph and Justin definitely just want to like spend more time doing art and designing games. So that's great because they can do what they are really good at doing and what they love doing, and then we can do what we're really good at doing, which is selling stuff and producing stuff.
Right. Cool. And so that sounds like a win-win situation. So you will gain some benefit from that by having more product, different diverse lines, all that kind of stuff. They'll gain the time back and some of the cost, and everybody kind of wins from the situation. Yeah, I mean, that's the hope, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool.
Everyone does what they're good at too. Right?
Yeah,
so
and
that's always make you hope.
Yeah,
exactly.
Cool. Looking at last one, the last thing you talked about was IP development. All right, so what does that mean, and what is Deepwater Games doing towards that end?
So I threw that one out there at you because, well, we're definitely working on some games that are. We're working on games that are coming from bigger IPs, especially comic IPs is a lot of what we work with, taking comics and building a game around them, and figuring out how to like build a game for a comic that is going to sell to comic fans and also be enjoyable by hobby gamers. So we like develop IP like that in the sense that we're like strengthening an IP's brand, right?
Right.
We also make games for Source Points Comics, our partner or our sister publishing company. We have a couple games in the pipeline that are of their comics, and we're doing that because those comics are worlds or universes that they want to expand. They're expanding into merch, or maybe we're expanding into like TV and things like that. Actually, I guess I can talk about that. Franklin and Ghost is one of our comics. We just announced the cast for it.
Nice.
And it's really exciting. It's getting made into an animated series. And
cool.
Yeah. And so we're developing a game for it. We're developing like a pretty like simple, like accessible card game for it, but it's something that we want to do so that we can like strengthen that brand and like be like, hey, you like Franklin and Ghost comics? You like the animated series? Like, here's also a game. Like, look at all this cool stuff you could get for Franklin and Ghost. And that's part of like getting those fans into it and like getting that wider audience, like capturing that wider audience and hooking them and just keeping them.
Yeah. Would you ever go so far as to say that Deepwater Games is a transmedia company?
I might say that Deepwater Games is a transmedia company.
Okay, it's just this funny term that I never have liked, but I get it. So for you, brand development is going either way, like saying Sovereign Skies is a game. Well, what if we made a comic book about it, right? Or this is a comic book. Let's make a game about it. Let's also look at animation or a toy or something, right? So I think that's a really good way to take something that is a love that you have, like an IP that you have, an idea that you have, and fully flesh it out into as many things that can possibly be that people will latch on to, and then find out what that sellout point is and don't cross it.
Yeah, exactly.
We're seeing it more and more with things. Like, look how many stuffed animals are starting to exist for like games. Well, you know what I mean?
Root needs stuffed animals.
Well, they made them. They're not. You can't buy them because they had them at their booth.
Yes.
You can get them t-shirts. Yeah. Those t-shirts. Well, they made t-shirts. They got to start selling them, but they made those awesome t-shirts.
Yeah. And even so, Root just did their role-playing game as well. So, I mean, there's other styles of games, and I think that's really cool. So, brand extension, IP extension as well is a really
I think Renegade's doing like Aquahorn stuffies, which is talking about a game into a stuffy also from a comic.
Right.
So we're gonna see. I think we're gonna see more and more of this happening because that's where your other audience comes from. Right. And so that's how you get those cross branding is like, oh, you're a fan of this. Well, maybe you'd like a game or the toy or the comic or
yeah. There's a lot to say about, you know, how games can be part of all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And the history of it is that games were not a good part of it, right? Most IP related games from the 80s were horrendous.
I hate to say it, I think people still have that mentality a little bit.
For sure.
And I'm really hoping it breaks. Like, I'll have to say, like, a super love one for me, besides like I love Scott Pilgrim, but like Steven Universe is coming out next year. And I just want fans to be like, I'm willing to try this game because like hopefully they don't have that 80s mentality, because I think it is an 80s mentality. If you grew up anywhere around that decade, like those games are crap.
Yep.
Yeah, it's also fandom specific too, and I know hobby gamers are like real. It's an IP game, but as soon as you get your head out of the hobby circle, there's a lot more willingness to try something just because it has a property you love on it.
Exactly.
I hope so, because I really think they're gonna love it, and I just hope they pay attention.
Yeah, dude. I'm sure they will, Erica.
Oh, please.
Yeah, seriously.
I love that community. So.
Great point about that is that like I see so many people at comic conventions who are carrying big box board games of just their favorite IP, and they don't know anything about this game, and they're just like, oh man, it's it's the Dark Souls board game, like this is so exciting, like I can't wait to go play this. Or this is a Fallout board game, and I'm like, do you know anything about that? And they're like, no, but it's Fallout. Like
it's Fallout.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is good and bad all at the same time, right? It's interesting.
Yeah.
And I definitely think you're right in terms of, you know, if it's a big enough brand, like say like Star Wars. So Star Wars is a big enough brand to have games at different levels and different tiers, not just value of money, but also for different people. Like if you go to a Walmart, there's like tons of Star Wars games, but they're not necessarily hobby games. They're more like kids games or family games. And then you get up into a hobby store and you'll see Star Wars at the hobby level. And you get Star Wars video games and Top Trump Star Wars and all these simple games. But so there's a lot of ways to do it, and it just depends on how powerful the brand is and what the market for that brand is, right? So obviously with Scott Pilgrim, you're aiming at a very specific demographic. But Steven Universe has a much wider variety, because my kids love Steven Universe and they're like 10.
So, the Scott Pilgrim was interesting because a lot of the feedback on that one, one of the reasons we did the relaunch is because it has two very different audiences.
Yeah.
And one 100% wants the game and one 100% wants the toys.
Yes.
And that's how they looked at it when they saw it, is they don't just see a game, they see a bunch of toys that they want. And so we had to basically reset the Kickstarter with that new mentality almost, where it's like you could do both. You can paint them, you can have them done, you can buy the toys, you can buy the full game, it kind of became that because the audience is so one or the other.
Did you expect that at all? Like when you guys went into it, like was there any talk about like maybe we should do it this way?
You know what? When we first went in, I had it very piecemeal. So you literally did buy the X you wanted, right? And so the core game came with all your good guys, but as you go through, you need extra Ramonas to allow her to change. So there's 3 Ramonas in the game, but they also match the level at which they come in.
Right.
And so, but the idea was, if you had a favorite, you pick all those people. And so it was hard to do that many SKUs, but they've kind of gone back to that idea now because they tried to box everything at once. And then it was kind of like, but I want that person and that person and I want to paint them and I want to, and so it was kind of like, you know what, you got to listen to your audience and what they wanted, and it rebooted with what they wanted. So hopefully,
and it was successful the second time around. So there you go.
I'll say the comment sections are total 180.
Right?
Oh, it's
now everyone's like, yay.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's sort of the interesting thing as well, is that we're in this weird kind of time of life where we're getting the feedback so fast that we're not sure, and we're not sure if it's right, and we're not sure if we should respond to it. And it's just interesting to live in this time when a couple really vocal backers can change the whole complexion of a campaign.
Well, and a big part of for Scott Pilgrim was Brian as well, like what he wants, because he owns IP. He very much, he decided what those minis were going to look like. He decided, you know what I mean? So a big part of that is the direction he wants it to go as well. And so you have other influences as you go through stuff.
Cool. Nolan, you seem intent on something.
I'm just reading the chat right now.
Yeah.
Oh, it's Ming's going
Ming's
on
having
about
a little rant.
No, it started.
I
glanced over and saw Jacob say, "Designers are not the least valuable. There's just thousands," and I was just like, "Oh no, what's happening?"
No. It's all good. It's all good.
It's all good.
We're fine.
It's all good.
So I would say seen as the least valuable.
Right.
I wouldn't say designers are the least valuable. I would say designers are seen as and not even the least valuable. It's just like you'll get your money if the game is successful. That's. But then the artists and the graphic designers is we need your stuff to make the game successful, so we'll pay you up front. And there's something a little bit that sticks in my craw about that. So Jay and I have reworked a bunch of our contracts to say this is what we would like. And I know I think the complexion has definitely changed. Like when we started about a decade ago or a little more than that, there's no such thing as advances. Like it was very rare to get an advance. But now it seems more and more like advances are a thing. Right. And for me, they don't have to be a big thing, but I might start upping my advance request just so that they become a thing for other people. Right. So
honestly, you can be putting a year or two up front, you know what I mean, on working on something and only make a few $1,000s off of it. And so that's, you know what I mean? Like a lot of us are not doing it for the money for that exact reason. And the people who are genuinely established, yes, they get their percent, but they actually sell it more like they sell the full game. And so if you start to talk to more and more people who this is their life, it's like when they sell a game, they sell it for the tens of thousands up front. And then kind of just walk away. Like there are a lot of people who function, I can't say a lot but the people who do this full time, they function more on that level. It's something totally different than what we're doing.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Although
selling to like Hasbro and Mattel and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So the long tail is in hobby, I think, a good way to do things, but maybe not anymore. Was a good way to do things, but maybe not anymore given the current kind of 4,000 titles a year.
Things rotate so quickly now. Like it used to be, let your game prove itself. It's now something that's awesome, might not even get noticed.
It's awesome for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Or unless you're with a company like Deepwater who's like going to 60 conventions and is like constantly doing that legwork. Yeah. But that's very uncommon amongst publishers in the hobby space.
Yeah.
And that's why we love Nolan.
Yeah. Love you guys.
And so
we love you so
that,
much that we've gone 7 minutes over time.
Yeah.
Oh, have we? Oh my gosh. I didn't even notice how late it was. This is great.
Because we're awesome.
Yeah, you guys are so great.
Well,
cool.
Since you've decided to be our guest this evening, that also means that we're going to put you in the hot seat one more time.
Oh, gosh,
we always ask the same question of our guests at the end of the show, and so here it goes. If you could give one piece of advice to all game designers out there of all stripes and colors and levels of interest, what would that piece of advice be?
I would say pay close attention to like what what's necessary to create a game, like do all of the steps, make the minimum viable prototype and things like that, but also like put a lot of thought into like what people aren't doing, and like think about like how you can make a cell sheet different. Think about how you can make your game just like slightly different. Like don't think about what your mechanics are going to be. Think about how that game is going to hook other people. And just like don't be afraid to think out of the box. Just because no one's doing it doesn't mean that it's the wrong thing to do.
Just no one's tried it, maybe.
Yeah.
Different is good usually. Just it depends on like there's just walking that fine line of too different.
Yeah. Oh yeah. There's definitely that line of too different.
Excellent.
Then you're just ahead of your time.
Exactly.
Yes, which is not necessarily bad, but also not necessarily.
No, it's usually bad because it means you're only good after you're dead.
Yeah, don't be dead. Dead is not great.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, thanks so much, Nolan, for coming on the show. Thanks, Jesse, for talking to us about the Meeple Syrup Boot Camp. And out there, if you're listening to us on the interwebs, join up at Meeple Syrup Shop Talk on our Facebook group. And Jesse will be guiding that as he goes forwards. You can find the old threads. You can jump right into a new thread, and that's fine. We're all cool with that. There's no It's not a closed group. It's an open entry and continuing on into April of next year. Yeah, we're very like that. And also thank you to Nolan for talking to us about Deepwater and the growing pains and all the successes that you guys are having. I think it's wonderful to be a part of your life as well. We're happy that you're moving closer to us in Canada.
Same.
You're like, you're like
you're like close.
Canadian almost. It's good.
Yeah.
And
you could drive.
Yeah, no, but whatever. What's coming up next for us, Erica? Do you remember?
Oh, I don't have our schedule up. I mean, we're completely scheduled until December, so yes, there is something.
There's something, but what is it?
I don't know. You put me on the spot. Damn it! I should have pulled this up.
Master.
I should have pulled this up.
I got it.
Oh, did you? You're faster than I am.
Yeah, because I just typed master into my search bar and it comes up.
Okay.
My search bar remembers all my stuff because I've programmed it to do things. Weird.
Computers are great.
Okay. Yeah, so we are all the way on November 6th. So that means next week. Oh, cool. So next week, we're going to have a designer spotlight, and the designer is a newer designer. It's Julio Nazario. Do you know him, Nolan?
I do, yeah. Julio's amazing.
Yeah. I met him the same time I actually physically first met you at ProATL.
Right, yeah.
And he makes a bunch of really neat, physical, very table presence oriented designs. But they're all
of a designer who just like thinks like way differently about
games. Differently.
Yeah.
And they are always mechanically intrinsic to the game. So it's not like this is just some fun looking thing like the tree in Everdell, which really doesn't have that much of a mechanical purpose. This is something that has to be like this to play the game. And so hopefully he'll get the show, which is going to bring out the whole reason why we do the video casts. So hopefully we'll get to see a lot of Julio's stuff. And that'll be next week on November 13th. And then I'll just tell you guys what's coming up a little bit after that. We have Keith
Mateka from Underworks. We're going to talk about
world building. It's the world building.
Yeah, and the roll through it verse is what I've been calling it.
Yeah. And seeing how that's been rolling out as an IP that he's developing, just to go and talk about what's underneath me right now. And then the last one for November, we'll give you all of November, is my brother from another mother, Mr. Kwanchai Moria, is coming on the show, another excellent illustrator, to talk about his stuffs in the industry, which is wide and varied and multitudinous. I think that's a word. So multitudinous, in fact, that I think I'm hiring him to do another cover for something soon. So there you go.
I was going to say, I think we all have a Kwanchai, which is like, he's going to work with everybody. Oh, okay, Jesse's next.
I don't have a Kwanchai.
We should all have a Kwanchai. We should
all have a Kwanchai.
We should clone Kwanchai and have them all over the place.
Plus, he's awesome.
So. Cool. So thank you very much, everybody out there. Jacob, Ming, Jesse. Who else is up there? We've got... Zach, Jonathan, Bebo, Adam. Oh, there's more people. Jesse again. Oh, it's the same Jesse. I just get mistaken by all the Jessies. Lots of people watching. Gareth, Patrick.
Thank you.
You guys are awesome.
Thank you all.
Thank you to all the Jessies out there, especially the Jesse that's right next to me, right over. You can't see my hand.
Don't poke me.
Wait, my camera's backwards there.
All right, cool. All right, we'll see you guys later. We're 13 minutes over. This has gone way too long. Good night.
Thank you for listening to the Meeple Syrup Show. If you'd like to help support our podcast and the live show, please visit www.patreon.com/meeplesyrup. Thank you for your support.